and welcome back to Ag on the Edge. I'm your host, Louise Lampera, and joining us today is one of the true powerhouses of Ventura County agriculture. My friend and my sometimes partner in crime on ag advocacy, Farm Bureau CEO Maureen McGuire. Welcome, Maureen.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the opportunity to come on to the podcast. It's been so amazing to listen to all these amazing perspectives in Ventura County, and really happy to be a part of this important work that you're doing.
Well, we are so excited to have you on today. You and I have worked together for the last couple of years, trying to advocate for, identify problems, and get some real conversation going about agriculture and the challenges they're facing, the direction things are going in the future here in Ventura County. So I'm really excited to have this conversation today at long last. But first, I want to start out, and let's introduce our listeners to you. Every time we sit down and have a conversation, I find out some new place that you lived, some new job experience that you had. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I grew up in Idaho in a small town, and I grew up in an agricultural community. And I looked around and I didn't see the prosperity that I was swimming in. I'd never even considered working in agriculture, and I was ready just to get out. So I had a couple strokes of wisdom when I was young. I knew I wasn't ready to immediately go to college, so I spent a year as an au pair in Germany. Came back, went to Idaho State University in the big city of Pocatello, Idaho, which to me was, that was a big place. And, after that, I spent a summer working in Alaska and went to graduate school in New York City. So I finished up at grad school in 2011.
And what did you study?
I studied international affairs, and I had a emphasis on conflict and security. So I was really thinking about natural resource management, supply chains, how you move things from one place to another place when people are under pressure. So that's what I studied. And it's been a really interesting way to come into this sphere. Mostly I was focused on, how do you recover from conflict? And now it's like, okay, well, how do you recover from modern economic challenges, or at least build resiliency within the systems? So after my time in New York, I moved to New Mexico to work at Los Alamos National Laboratories in their project management division, which was a really cool place to start your sort of, adult career. I learned a lot there, but I was ready for something more entrepreneurial. I really wanted to get into the day-to-day operations of making something. Because Los Alamos, you're working on things that get built over a 20, 30-year period. And it was kind of too early for me to be on those kind of projects. So I moved to Oxnard to take on the district manager role for a farm labor contractor, Rancho Harvest. And that's how I got to California.
Okay. So crisis project management in some ways, right? Goods movement and supply movement. A little bit of exposure to long-term, multi-decade projects, and now contract labor.
Yeah.
So what brought you to the Farm Bureau then?
Yeah, so I worked at Rancho Harvest for a couple of years, and then which was really focused just on the labor side, which was a great way to enter into agriculture because labor is such an important part of the recipe that brings food to the table. But I was curious about other parts of the process, and I worked for Good Farms, which is a sort of internationally diversified strawberry company and mixed berry category company. So blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, and then they also do tomatoes. So I worked there for 7 years, and while I was there, COVID happened, and I started interacting with the Farm Bureau because they were part of a group that was bringing vaccination clinics to the farms. And
Nice.
so I was working at vaccination clinics on local farms as a representative of the company, but also because I was very interested in bringing those services directly to the farm workers. And I thought, man, I've been involved in so many cool projects through Good Farms that were on that edge of social entrepreneurship or advocacy. How could I make this a higher percentage of my day? And so when John Christ announced his retirement, a few people were like, you should go for it. So I put my hat in the ring, and that was about 3 years ago that I came on to Farm Bureau.
Yep, about 3 years ago that you and I met and started, talking about how we could do some of this advocacy work together. So
Yeah, and I'm so lucky. I mean, you have been a gracious ambassador to me into the policy world, because even though I studied that in graduate school, I never worked in it. And so I feel like the competency that I brought to the Farm Bureau role was in bringing that grower perspective into the conversation, because I had been working in operational agriculture at that point for over 10 years. And to be able to then build such a great friendship and partnership with you has added a lot of depth to the positions that I've been able to bring forward at the Farm Bureau.
well, and I think likewise, the having an understanding of the policy side of it, the regulatory and what different impacts could be, but having zero ag operational background, ag labor background, it's just been invaluable to be able to reach out to you with a, hey, this is written this way. Could it impact, and how? And I think that, that's really, like you said, it created a lot of richness in the solutions that Farm Bureau Collab, we've both been able to propose.
I think, too, coming from Idaho, working a lot in Mexico during my ag career, to then be dropped into land use restrictions in Ventura County, it's like another planet. And so to be able to be like, wait, they really say that? That's actually the rule? They even care about whether people do X or Y? It's been really eye-opening, and I've tried to hold on to that fresh perspective of saying, all right, a reasonable person who has experience, would they anticipate that this rule existed or didn't exist? And then I think we have such an amazing team here in Ventura County that you're a part of, to say, all right, now that we know the rule exists, why was it there? And are there any alternatives or other ways to satisfy like a broad range of people who have an interest in the issue, while also trying to create a business-friendly environment, an ag-friendly environment that allows us to do the core work of feeding the nation?
Right,
Yeah.
right. And bringing also to the regulation or to our discussion around the regulations that, okay, we may not see the impacts of whatever the regulation is from an economic standpoint for 10 years, 15 years, right? Some of these we have to look at longer term, multi-generational even, which I think you bring a lot to the table with your background. And definitely we are going to go into all the policy. We're gonna talk about, the challenges. But before we do that, tell us a little bit about the Farm Bureau and what the Farm Bureau's role is, some of the things that the Farm Bureau is trying to accomplish.
Yeah, so the Farm Bureau system is a sort of a historical organization. And so back when people were really starting to farm more intensely in the West, you were required to have a Farm Bureau in order to have a government-supported ag engineer come to your community. And so the Farm Bureau was started in 1914 in order to bring ag, engineer here to Ventura County. All the counties have farm bureaus in the United States, or most of them have farm bureaus. California has 54 county farm bureaus. And there was a really deep connection with the technical services. That has since changed, where as the land grant universities were established, they brought on cooperative extension. So a lot of the work that cooperative extension does now was sort of the purview of Farm Bureau in the past, but it was deeply integrated with community services and also advocacy. And so now what Farm Bureau focuses on in general is still community service type things, but also the advocacy part of it. And that means that every Farm Bureau is completely different because the needs of those specific counties are different. So Ventura County Farm Bureau looks a lot different than Tulare or Yolo County or San Francisco County. They all have honed in on the needs of their community.
Okay. And I just got to follow up on one statement that you made. San Francisco County has a Farm Bureau.
That's right. San Francisco County is the newest county to establish a Farm Bureau.
Wow.
And so they are really looking, obviously, at urban food systems, community gardens, how to do ag education for students, and get students in elementary school out to touch soil, things like that. They're much more focused on agricultural literacy there, whereas we get into, water issues, land use issues, pesticides. We cover what I would consider a lot more shaping of policy, where San Francisco Farm Bureau is really more about consumer interface.
Wow.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see what they end up coming out with all of San Francisco County and San Francisco the city share the same boundaries. So that
and
vastly
San
different
Francisco,
than here.
San Francisco County doesn't have staff, whereas Farm Bureau County Farm Bureau has 5 employees.
Right.
Some farm bureaus have half of an employee, so they're all different, but they're all independent also. And then we work with California Farm Bureau on statewide issues. And then California Farm Bureau works with American Farm Bureau Federation on national issues.
Okay. So there's a national umbrella that trickles down to the state that then gets implemented as regionally applicable in each county.
Yeah, and there's a sort of parliamentary process to that. So we send delegates to the state to establish policy. The state sends delegates to the federal system to establish federal policy. So it's like a mini government, which makes a lot of sense when you think about people were riding horses to these meetings back in the day.
Yeah.
And we really needed a system like that. So California Farm Bureau supports our Ventura County Farm Bureau with legal services, and then also with lobbying up in Sacramento.
Okay. But then you have the freedom, let's say, to identify and focus on Ventura County specific issues.
Yeah, and Ventura County has not always gone along with California Farm Bureau or American Farm Bureau Federation. Famously, Rex Laird, 2 CEOs of the Farm Bureau ago, took really innovative positions on pesticides near schools. We definitely function independently and work on the behalf of the farmers here in Ventura County, which is exactly how the system is supposed to work.
Nice.
And so we are responsible for our members here in Ventura County.
Nice, nice. And, we've talked about this probably hundreds of hours over the last several years, right? But here locally, Ventura County agriculture is under a lot of pressure. Some of it, is identical to issues farmers throughout the state, throughout the nation are facing. Some of it is very specific to our region. And you mentioned, that the formula of what agriculture is based on. And we've had some previous guests on the podcast that identify agriculture as a three-legged stool. The first leg being land, the next leg being water, and then the third leg either labor or capital. Either way, or maybe it's a four-legged stool, right? 3, 4 legs, labor, capital. Either way, without all of those things, agriculture does not exist.
Yeah, absolutely. And we work on all of those things. And so it's a complex system and a complicated system.
Yeah.
So, the value of agriculture is higher than the sum of its parts. And if we degrade any of those inputs into that system, we don't just lose pounds of food, but we lose something I think really fundamental to our culture here in Ventura County. And, it's, I think, a real shame, the degradation of the business confidence in farming, because it's a vocation that is so intrinsic to human life. And that really motivates me in my work at the Farm Bureau, is to think, how do we create a shared vision of the future of farming that people could be excited about? It's hard to look at the land use issues or the water issues or the labor issues and not really feel worried about the future. And the truth is, there have to be people dedicated to navigating that path, or we won't have a functioning, sustainable, long-term system here, at least in Ventura County.
Yeah. And, emphasis on the long term.
Right.
So many businesses, their projection, so many other types of business, and agriculture to an extent, but the projection is quarterly, right? What's the Q2, numbers going to be? What's Q3? What's the end of year report? For agriculture, it's what's the report off of this generation?
Yeah,
going
I would
into
say
the next.
10-year cycles is probably as short as you can get. If you're talking about ROI and ag, you are not thinking, what did I make this season? Certainly not this quarter.
Right.
But even this season. And then to think, is it worth it for me to keep going? You have to be thinking on, at the minimum, 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So let's dive into, particularly with a focus here in Ventura, land use. And one of the things that is a little unique in Ventura, and Corinne Bell, the Ag Commissioner, touched on this a little bit when we spoke, that Ventura County is unique in that we have cities, highly developed areas, that go right up to our agricultural lands, working agricultural lands. We even have agricultural lands in the middle of cities, surrounded on all sides. And those are two very different land uses. And we get calls all the time. I get calls all the time discussing various conflicts between the two. And I'm sure you do as well. So could you tell us a little bit about, what do you see with land use and adjacent conflicts and the like, and how is it impacting our farmers?
Yeah. What came to mind when you were talking about that is a story from my hometown. A lot of people are moving to Idaho, And when I was growing up, and until very recently, it was actually prohibited to sell cars on Sundays. The idea being that they really wanted to make it so that not a lot of business happened on Sundays. Almost everything closed on Sundays. And now that a lot of people are moving there from other places where a lot of business happens on Sundays, people want things to change. They want to be able to buy whatever they want on a Sunday. And it's a fundamental change to how that community is operating. And they actually overturned the prohibition.
Wow.
Mostly from people who had maybe lived there a couple years. And so there's a big backlash in the community saying, like, you're changing what has been a historic value in this area, and you don't even really have ties here. You might not even live here longer than a couple of years when you realize how tough the winters are. I think a little bit of that is happening in the rural-urban interface in Ventura County, where people have an idea of what farming is, and maybe it's the Shire from the Lord of the Rings, thinking about, a mythical Farmer John who, goes around with a vegetable cart or something like that, and then they buy a house with a beautiful view, and they didn't take into consideration that the field's going to be fumigated, that the workers are going to arrive at 6 in the morning, that the tractors are going to be warming up, that someone's going to be flying a drone over to take NDVI photos, that there might be bees. And so a lot of the calls that I get are about things that are absolutely consistent with farming at a commercial scale, that person just wasn't aware of when they bought their house right next to a farm. And my view is that, we have to protect the right to farm. We don't only need to protect the historical methods used for farming, but also the future methods. We might need to run farming robots all night long with lights on them. And if you chose to buy a house next to a farm that now is being harvested by an automated harvester, like, I don't think it's the farmer that should have to not bring their crop out of the field. I think it's the person who's coming in that needs to adapt and accept that that's part of doing business. So that rural-urban interface issue is really tough because I wouldn't want to live next to bright lights, all
Right.
night long.
Heavy machinery.
I totally
and-
get
yeah.
it. But if you live next to dairies, it's going to smell bad. And similarly, like, I used to live in New York City. It's loud all night long. Like, these are characteristics of having that kind of use. And we've, as a community, said we want to protect agriculture. We have an obligation with the weather and the soil quality we have to feed our nation. You cannot replicate what we do here in Ventura County in other places in the world. So we have to look to that, sort of obligation over and above what one individual's preferences are for, their house that they just bought from a subdivision next to a farm.
Right.
Hopefully
right.
that makes sense, but I just feel like this calling to that higher goal of this intrinsically good thing of making food means we have to make local accommodations to protect that.
Well, and I think, like you pointed out, the Ventura County residents have made it clear they want to protect farming. It seems that it's, in the details of that, like everything, right? The devil is in the details. And there is this big misunderstanding. I think it's you that has said this statement, but that farm fields are actually a factory. They just happen to be a beautiful factory. And there's the clash between the beauty that we can all see versus the experience of the actual operations. And, part of what this podcast is trying to do is close that gap and help with the education. But I feel like there's so much more to do.
I think too, I never, before I got into actual farming, I had a lot of really similar views of, I think, though, a lot of the people that are weighing into this conversation who are coming from outside of that operational perspective. And so I have gone through that process of learning the realities in the field. So I'll give you an example. I never knew how much I hated birds until those birds were in my field eating my crop and pooping on everything. Now, I cannot tell you how passionate I am around keeping the birds out of the field. And I had, I came into it thinking, I'll live in harmony or, whatever. But I am always going to put the safety of my customer over, a seagull who wants to eat some strawberries. And I think that's a very reasonable reaction. And similarly, I think a lot of people are saying, everybody should just move to regenerative farming. I challenge you to grow some squash in your Ventura County garden, at your house where our relative humidity is pretty high, and tell me how you control powdery mildew with a regenerative system.
I haven't succeeded.
No,
Yeah.
I would love to grow organic vegetables in my garden, and this is no bash on organics. But I'm saying is, it's a real struggle to make that choice when you're going to lose your crop. When that's going to mean you don't have food for your family, that you just spent all this time growing these squash in your backyard, or it could mean your business going under. So if there are businesses who want to opt into those things, absolutely, they should go for it. They have a customer base that needs to be served. But when I hear from the general community around, I think farmers should do X or Y, in general, there's really good reasons why farmers are making those decisions. And it's just a gap in experience and knowledge that could be closed, through things like this podcast, where I think there's a lot of opportunity to build a shared vision and perspective.
I agree. Going back to that, neighboring land use conflict, we're seeing it not even, where there's housing developments next to agricultural fields. Even something as seemingly benign as a new bike trail through agricultural fields, right, could have devastating impacts on the farmers whose fields that bike path either runs adjacent to or worse through.
I mean, a food safety incident is devastating. I think as someone who's made food for a living, your vision is that people are going to eat that food to nourish themselves. We would talk to the harvesters and talk about who eats that food. I mean, I grew strawberries, which is a luxury product. So we'd say, who's buying these strawberries? It might be a grandmother who has her grandkids over to her house and is giving them a special treat of strawberries. It could be someone, recovering from a medical situation who's choosing a nourishing food. And they're very expensive. And so we really tried to emphasize who the consumer is, and to think that your product could hurt that person, that is so fundamentally against the view and mission of farmers, that the idea that dogs running through your field who are on the bike trail, people using the bathroom because there's no bathrooms available, trash, that kind of stuff is just, I don't think people outside of farming understand the level of incompatibility there is just on the food safety side.
Right.
Let
The
alone
risk.
trespassing, late employees interacting with bikers. There's a lot of complicated situations that can arise when the public interfaces. But I think the one of the main critical ones that I don't hear the public talking about, but I do hear farmers, is on that food safety aspect.
Yeah, yeah. It's the equivalent of, allowing a public sidewalk through the middle of your factory, right? And the concern is, is somebody going to get hurt from that? And then secondarily, is this going to cause me to not be able to produce what I need to produce?
And in general, these are businesses that are here to nourish people. And so, they're not here to provide entertainment. They're, not focused on, creating public spaces for people to exercise.
Yeah,
These are, like you said, these are factories there's a whole system set up, and they move fast with heavy machinery. It's a skilled workforce. These are not places that are intended to be like integrated into they're not forests.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that I think is something that, especially on social media, I've seen the general public, I don't want to say get a little wrong, but maybe misunderstand or have a not full viewpoint, right? Where when they talk about all of the wonderful, open space and view sheds and public areas in Ventura County, they throw the agricultural fields in there. And nothing could be further from the truth. These are privately owned parcels. These are, again, working landscapes. And how can we separate that in people's minds, I think, is going to be a challenge.
Yeah, and I think your metaphor of like this is like having a public sidewalk through a factory is a really good one. And I would challenge anybody from the public to think about whatever they do for work. Would I want the public coming through there? I think because I worked so much in labor, I think about labor, right?
Yeah.
If you're a supervisor, you have to have sexual harassment training. There are processes in place for how to communicate with your employees. The employees among themselves have rules on how they can communicate to create a safe work environment. Now you bring a bunch of the public in, and the business is now liable for whatever is said to a harvester who is just trying to get the crop out of the field. And unfortunately, I would hate that this happens, but now you're talking about interfaces of this poor farm worker who's getting, yelled at or sexually harassed or having to interface now with the public, and they're just there to harvest the fruit.
Right.
They're not the
Right.
cashier at Chipotle, right?
Right.
That's not their job. They're not getting paid to interface with bikers, wild dogs, people who are walking the trail, or people who are using the trail for alternative purposes that the trail's not intended for.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to be a solo female irrigator driving my ATV around trying to check for leaks in a context where where the public is now coming through that area.
Well, and, as I'm picturing those scenarios in my mind, the other thing that jumps out, besides the actual, person-to-person interaction, is farm worker safety is a huge concern, right? And should be. Farm workers are often dressed in PPE, appropriate for the tasks that they're doing, much like factory workers are dressed in the appropriate, right, gloves, hard hat, whatever, goggles, whatever it may be.
And that's all highly regulated.
Right.
The type of glove, the thickness of it, the
Right.
type of eye protection, hearing protection, etc.
And now I'm envisioning, me walking my dogs in, my yoga pants and t-shirt through the middle of that. And does this add to the farmer's liability? And how do we ensure that it doesn't and address that?
I think the only solution I can see is that farmers will farm less, and they'll have to absorb the burden of whatever that public interface is by moving their farming back from where that's happening.
So you think they'll actually like take areas out of production?
I think that's unfortunately the only way I could understand that you would be able to assure. So you're gonna have to spend thousands of dollars putting up fencing, pull out hundreds and hundreds of acres, as a community to pull back from those spaces and essentially create like border or buffer zones that can discourage any sort of public interface. Because if you're going to bring in an automated trimmer or a spray rig, it's your obligation to make sure that no one gets hurt. And now what's happened is that whoever is putting that bike trail in has decided to put all of that liability on you now as the private landowner.
Yeah.
And the only way I think you could ensure to the degree to continue to be able to do business is to essentially not do business there and pull back. And so that bike trail that's supposed to be so beautiful is now going to be a corridor of chain link fences and bare ground, because you also wouldn't want to create a habitat for pests or wildlife. So I think that's a really negative outcome to me personally. I love bike trails. I would love to ride bike trails around. I just think we could find ways to put those bike trails in that move people across the county, make awesome places for people to exercise that aren't straight through agricultural land.
Yeah. And, when you think about, looking at the good intentions of bringing why someone would support bringing the public closer to agricultural operations, right? Because there's a lot of good intentions in doing that. And it's addressing what is a need on the flip side of the coin, which is not isolating people from where their food is produced,
Sure.
right? You value what you know and what you love.
And we want transparency. There's
Absolutely.
no mystery.
Right.
I think everybody should be in a position to open their doors like on Farm Day, where farmers are inviting the public in and saying, let me give you context. Let me tell you what we're doing here so that you as neighbors understand why we need the tractors at 6 a.m, why we need the lights, what are these sprays controlling, why is that important? And, I think the fundamental difference is the consent. The farmer is inviting the public in and sharing and being a neighbor and a member of the community versus someone, without consent, essentially inserting themselves.
Right. And, I think it's no one's intention to harm agriculture here in Ventura County. But it's that inadvertent consequence, unintended consequences that.
And I think that's why it's important to talk to farmers.
Yes.
And have a robust process when you're thinking about new ways that people could, bring tourism to Ventura County, actually engaging with the landowners and with the farmers in the area to understand their challenges. I think that's the pathway to creating a community that everybody can be happy in.
Right.
Rather than saying, this is what we're going to do, you get on board or not.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Or, we'll address those issues in the environmental impact, whatever. But to start the conversation early, which I do have to give credit, we are seeing more and more, partially due to both of us not being afraid to
Well,
knock on doors and start the conversation.
if
but-
you're going to do an activity, and it's going to impact landowners, and you don't proactively reach out to those landowners or those growers, you're not doing stakeholder engagement.
Right.
Like
right.
that, that's less than what we would do in any other context.
Right.
And so to think that landowners and growers are monitoring public meetings, if you can't even read these agendas, like as someone who's coming from a non-policy perspective, the language does not make sense. So if your job every day is to work from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. out in the field and then doing stacks and stacks of paperwork, the last thing you're going to be doing is pulling up all of the agendas of the hundreds of different committees and layers of evaluation for these public projects. You're completely left out. And I think that's the work we're trying to do is to say, this is an important voice that is not being heard, who then suffers the impact the most.
Right.
And where I think there's a little failure in the democratic system is that each of those farmers gets one vote, which is a cool part of democracy, right? There's an egalitarian part of that. But they're also operating so much land that there's a disproportionate impact between the urban perspective and the, it's not really rural, but the more agricultural perspective. So when we're talking about public policy, there's so many more votes from people with an urban perspective that are not equaled out by the number of farmers that are engaging in that democratic system.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's important to have organizations like the Farm Bureau, like CoLab, Ventura County Ag Association, who can try and fill that gap. But it's never going to be filled until we can create a value of engaging with agriculture proactively on the decision-making process.
And I think that all starts with educating, right? And trying to get the urban or suburban, residents to really understand what agriculture is, what its challenges are, what it really brings, to society, not just, Ventura County alone, but, because of who we are and, as you pointed out, Ventura County feeds the world. Our crops go everywhere.
Yeah. In Idaho, you can't grow crops in wintertime. Tucson, Arizona, you can't grow crops in the summertime. Like, we are part of what makes it possible for all of these different areas to exist. And, California is the place where specialty crops are grown. It's the, top 9 producing counties out of, the entire United States are in California. We are one of the more, most important ag producing regions in the world. And we have a real obligation to be good stewards, not only for ourselves, to your point about long-term thinking, but also for our grandkids and our great-grandkids to make sure that they still have this really valuable arable land available to feed whatever needs they have at that time.
Right. And, and that's, it's such a challenge. It's such a challenge. You talked about, how people mention, could the farmers just go to regenerative farming?
Right.
Well, as one of our guests, Aaron, the agronomist, stated, what that would look like here in Ventura is vastly different than what regenerative farming is anywhere else in the world. And it's because of the gift we have to be able to do three harvests a year. So, expanding that knowledge that, what specifically works and doesn't work here in Ventura County, and getting everyone to understand that?
Well, I think exploring new ways of growing is critical to us adapting to change. So, I think we should be looking into organic and regenerative and new technology. And I challenge people all the time who talk to me about regenerative growing. I think you would really get some farmers involved if you took a celery field on the Oxnard Plain that is infected with Fusarium race 4, which is a soil-borne disease. It doesn't hurt humans, but it hurts plants, that is only going to increase because as the climate warms, Fusarium loves it to
Love
be
the
hot.
warmth, yep.
And so this soil-borne disease is a major challenge, a major threat to Ventura County agriculture in the future. I want to see one of those fields turned around back to its prior productivity using those methods. If you show me that, if you solve actual farmers' real day-to-day challenges, you'll have so many people on board.
Wow.
But you have to actually solve the farmer's problem. There's not enough of a market for it to be a draw to say, oh, well, I'll just have a quarter of my yield or half of my yield. I'll make half the amount of product. There's not enough money on the customer side to close the gap there. So when you tell a farmer, hey, I think you should make 50% of the money that you're making, and they're already losing money, or maybe on that 10-year time frame, they might make 4 or 5% of
Right.
profit. You're telling them essentially you want them to shut down their business. And then people are curious why people aren't jumping onto these very fashionable, interesting and compelling ways of growing food. The risk is too high. So if you want farmers to do risky things, we need to do things to mitigate that risk, like invest in research, create opportunities for people to experiment. And that should be driven, in my view, through the agronomy, through cooperative extension, through the Rodale Organic Institute, which we're very lucky to have here
Yes.
in Ventura County, but not through the public rural-urban interface that has more to do with what do I want my neighborhood to look like than what is my obligation to feed the world.
And, not through regulatory mandates,
Right.
but rather through removal of impediments
Yeah.
to encourage the creativity, to encourage the technological growth.
That's what I meant to say. Yeah.
I think you did. You did say it. You did say it. We've touched really briefly on technology a couple of times. And one of the things that the Farm Bureau, I know, does every year is the Ag Tech Fair.
Yeah.
So ag technology, what's happening? What's coming?
Yeah, so I was really lucky to work with a lot of really cool entrepreneurs when I worked at Good Farms who were making huge innovations in the field. And so when I came on to the Farm Bureau, I was like, we have to get this information out, and we really need to serve our community. Like, that's what we're here for. And so we started the Ag Tech Fair. It's typically free to attend, thanks to our really generous sponsors. And we show a wide variety of ag technology. So there's always some sort of robotic, or automation type of technology on automated harvesting, or maybe laser weeding, that kind of thing. Then there's some really cool stuff happening with light. So you can use UV light to do some of your pest control. Like we talked about powdery mildew.
Wow.
You can actually sanitize the plant with UV light. It's still new. Mm-hmm. We don't know yet if it's going to be the next big thing, but we're really excited to be exploring that. We also bring different software. So there's new project management tools or payroll tools that are being developed that really reflect the needs of specialty crops that haven't been developed before.
Wow.
And so we try to bring everybody all together. always something cool coming on irrigation, automated valves or different ways that people are integrating machine learning and AI into the hardware of the field operations.
Okay. And is that scheduled for this year?
Yeah, so September 23rd at the Courtyard Marriott in Oxnard. And we have a full roster of speakers.
Great.
And I think we'll have about 40 exhibitors at that event.
And that's open to the public. So if anybody
Yeah.
listening wants to come check out, these laser weed control, which I'm sure is not at all as exciting as what I'm envisioning, but other robotic harvesters and the like, anybody can come to that.
Yeah, and it's vcagritechfair.com.
Great.
So it's a accessible website you can kind of see as we start to release the agenda.
Great. And I know, the past decade, maybe a little bit longer, some of this growing technology, has really been focused around water conservation. Moisture meters, valves that only open for that tree.
Right.
If that tree needs it, but its neighbor doesn't, then, and so much of that is really being driven by California water policy, which is the next leg of the stool, and water being essential for agriculture. But we keep hearing about,
there's not enough.
or there's not enough, or worse, it still pops up on social media that farmers are wasting our water. So what's happening with water?
Yeah. So one thing I think everyone needs to keep in mind is that a lot of the water farmers use goes to the consumer in the form of fruits and vegetables. So if you need X number of liters of water a day, part of that you get from eating the food that you eat. So part of the water, a big part of the water that farmers use, actually is part of health and human safety. It is part of your water allocation as an individual human through your food. And you can see this really easily if you just take a piece of kale and compare it to a kale chip. You can see
true. Yes.
There's a huge difference in the amount of water, right?
Yes.
Similarly, though, Ventura County is a lead performer in water conservation. We have done things in Ventura County that have led the charge on water conservation. They said, for example, you can't do plant establishment on drip tape for celery. Well, they figured it out here in Ventura County. Early adopters of micro sprinklers for lots of different commodities. And that's very aligned with farmers' business because water is very expensive. So when you're looking at your balance sheet and you're thinking, how do I make more money? Implementing technology that reduces the amount of water that you apply is directly benefiting each of those businesses. So farmers are very diligent and very innovative in what they implement in their fields.
So the other side, though, there's applying water to your fields, and when we get rain, clearly, that helps, both with the cost and with, not having to come up with another supply for irrigation. But recently, the state, Regional Water Quality Control Board, has passed some new requirements, restrictions related to the water that comes off your field. And Farm Bureau has been involved in that since day one. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. There are regulations around any sort of water discharge. And so those are governed by the State Water Board, who delegates the local authority to the Regional Water Board. And Ventura County is in the LA Regional Water Quality Control Board district. And so that also applies to cities. So, both you and I live in cities.
Yep.
And so we participate through our taxes to the city. And they take care of our obligation in terms of our wastewater, your sewer from
Yep.
your toilet and the runoff that comes from your personal property when the rain comes is all handled by the city on your behalf. Similarly, if you run a wastewater treatment plant or you have a factory, you have what's called a discharge permit that allows you to put water out into the environment and also restricts what can be in that water to not contaminate the environment,
Okay.
right? Well, farmers have the same obligation under the law. The difference is we have so much land, and the way that water runs through that land can't be tacked down to one individual farmer necessarily. And so the farmers come together to comply as a big group because there's not enough monitoring that could possibly happen to figure out,
Right.
where certain things are coming from. And so that big group, that coalition, is the Ventura County Agricultural Irrigated Lands Group, and the Farm Bureau runs that group. So we do $2 million a year worth of environmental monitoring, where we look at commingled drainage from farms, and we do testing to see what kinds of chemicals are in that drainage. And then we work with farmers to implement management practices to preserve the quality of that water or reduce the amount of constituents that get out there. And a couple examples are selenium is naturally occurring in our
Right.
groundwater.
It's in the soil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when we pull that groundwater up and we apply it to the crops, and then the rain falls, and that rain falls so much that it flows, off of the farm, it can take some selenium with it. So the farmer's not applying selenium, but that selenium through the process of farming is now becoming available in the environment to impact the watersheds or the ocean. So, these aren't nefarious things that are happening where people are dumping chemicals out into the watershed.
Okay.
These are impacts of humans existing in nature.
This is what happens as part of operations.
Right. Yeah. And so, for example, with fertilizer, you can be the best farmer in the world using the least amount of fertilizer possible to bring your crop out. But if a big rain comes and your fertilizer is out there, that rain is going to dilute that fertilizer and carry it along unless you intervene to slow the water down and create opportunities or use management practices to reduce that impact. So that program had been in operation since 2005, and Farm Bureau has been the administrator of that coalition. And then the law changed very significantly in 2023, and the program changed from being very collective, where everyone worked together, because the where the parcel lines are drawn by humans.
Exactly. Water does not pay attention.
Right.
Yeah.
The water doesn't stop just because on the assessor's map there's a line there, right? So now the program has changed significantly to be very focused on the individual. So there's two elements. One is the irrigation and nutrient management reporting, which is very focused on fertilizer and protecting the quality of our groundwater. And we are very lucky. Ventura County does not have a problem with fertilizer impacts on groundwater as opposed to other places in the country, just due to the way that our basin is structured. So it's always one of those great success stories that we can share, is like you can be very confident in your groundwater, even as you see all of these fields. We have very, very safe groundwater here. On the other side, where is the restrictions on based on total maximum daily loads, and now it gets very technical, but essentially what the Water Board is saying is everyone's allowed to put a little bit of something out into the watershed, let's say nitrogen.
Okay.
So if you're a wastewater treatment plant, who, on behalf of us using our toilets,
right.
is going to make that sewage into something, else you're always putting a little bit of nitrogen out, right? If you fertilize your lawn, a little bit of nitrogen is going to go out into the environment. And then similarly, if you're a farmer, a little bit of nitrogen is going to go out, especially in rainstorms.
Right.
So the water board is saying you can do a little bit. Everybody can do a little bit. And if we combine all of that, then the environment will be protected. I think there's some wisdom in that. Where we're going to be seeing some struggles is where those limits are. So the water board is telling us your storm water that comes off your field has to be safer than drinking water. It actually has to be cleaner from a nitrogen perspective than what you could buy in a bottle of water from the gas station.
Wow.
And so, these regulations are going to be extremely difficult, potentially impossible to comply with. And so we've worked really, really hard to come up with compliance solutions that are actually practical for farmers. And we spent years advocating, working on developing the regulation with the water board, trying to give them the context and make sure they understand farming, because 99.9% of what they work on is not farming.
Well, they're the LA
Right.
Regional Water
They're
Quality
working
Control
on
Board. So,
buried tanks for petroleum
Yeah.
under the ground, or ports, bringing in big ships into the, Long Beach or whatever.
Right.
And so this is very different from their typical waste discharge permit. And so, that education process has taken years. And as we're implementing it, I think there's even more learnings that are coming forward. And so farmers are really going to have to grapple with this new regulation that, by the way, does not exist in this format anywhere else. So it's all experimental. We are learning. We're building the plane as we're flying it. But we're really trying to focus in on how to create a sustainable relationship between the watersheds, the oceans, and the farmers that allows everybody to get beneficial use from that water. Us eating the food, the farmers using that water to, make the food, but then also making sure that the plants and animals who are swimming in the watershed or the people who are surfing in the ocean are all safe. So that's the process we're entering into now. We have about 300 growers that are needing to comply with this law now, and by 2028, the vast majority of growers in Ventura County will be complying in some form to this new regulation.
So what do those 300 growers need to do now?
Yeah, so they have to decide if they want to take on monitoring their own farm at various discharge points, or where the water comes off of their farm. They want to do their own monitoring plan and kind of submit samples to a laboratory and say, I am going to be evaluated based on this quantitative measure that I am not violating these restrictions of how much of whatever chemical cannot come off of my ground. Or they can do a qualitative type of compliance where they do a management practice plan working with a technical service provider, so somebody who knows about retention basins and vegetative strips and tailwater recovery systems or bioreactors to put together a plan. So the compliance is the same. You can't have the chemicals coming off of the field, or we would say constituents coming off of the field. But how you want to be judged is different. One way you're saying, I want to be judged with a test. And the other way you're saying, I want to be judged with a plan. It's kind of like if you're going to graduate from college, do you want to do a senior project, or do you want to do one final test for all 4 years? Where we worked really, really hard is allowing that plan to be considered compliance with the law. So we spent years advocating for that because we felt that was better reflective of what was practical for farmers, work with someone who's a real expert on a site-by-site level, rather than say, okay, you have to take this sample and send it to the lab, and if that result comes back, you've violated the law. So, we're in the process now where people are making their selections between track 1, which is the monitoring and reporting plan,
The
test, or track 2, which is the management practice plan, which is like the senior project.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And what do these plans look like? I mean, I'm trying to envision, Ventura County with, instead of acres upon acres of orchards or row crops, of
Just retention basins.
yes.
Yeah. We don't know yet because none of them have ever been approved yet.
Okay.
But one of the kind of unsung opportunities that we also heavily advocated for is regional projects. So my dream is that we would do regional projects based on collective growers coming together, probably with cities, with the county, to identify areas where we could make big investments in the land, but they would serve a lot of people. So like an engineered wetland before Ormond Beach would be amazing. And, you could get some of Oxnard, some of the Oxnard Plains growers, and the county to all meet their compliance obligation on one big, really cool project.
One really big project.
Yeah. If we choose to go the route of everyone's on their own, then you will definitely see ag land come out of production for retention basins. You'll probably see people decide to pull some of their operations out, so pull their trees out of operation because it might be their home and they have a 10-acre orchard and they're like, you know what? I can't put in $300,000 to comply with this.
Right.
And, you might need to spend that whether you do track 1 or track 2.
Right.
And so why not switch to oaks then? Or something that's not regulated. So, it's going to be a really tricky situation to see what the impact is. Well, I think kind of to summarize, the regulation is going to be really tough, and we're learning as we go. But kind of similar to our earlier part of the conversation, nobody wants to damage ag. And so we're going to be working with the LA Regional Water Board very closely, monitoring what the impact of this new law is. So we're really encouraging people, like, if you're at a decision point where you're like, I'm going to rip out my trees, I do not see a path forward, come to us, talk to us. We want to share your story because we may be able to figure out some middle ground. And that's the beauty of advocacy.
Right.
And having a grassroots organization that understands farming is you're not alone. And so this is not a black and white thing. It is something we are all learning together, and we need to be active in shaping what that will become. And on the flip side, every farmer that I've talked to is interested in preserving water quality. We're all people who live in Ventura County, who care about Ventura County, who want to either are surfers or want to be surfers.
I was just going to say, nearly every farmer I meet is also a surfer.
Oh, yeah.
So,
I mean, these are people who like to be outdoors,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
I think a lot of farmers see themselves as land stewards. And so as we bring that education to them, they make that altruistic choice over and over again. We've been running the Ventura County Agriculture Irrigated Lands group for over 15 years. We have compliance rates in the over 90%.
Wow.
On paying their assessments, on getting their
voluntary
continuing-
compliance rates, right?
I mean, they're theoretically not voluntary, but there's been essentially no enforcement. And so these are people who are spending millions of dollars because they actually believe in the philosophical the spirit of the law. And so, it's a really cool story to tell.
Yeah.
How many years we have brought this program and built the foundation for, harmony between the watersheds and the agricultural operations. And we really want to keep that spirit going.
Yeah, and it seems like it goes back to a little bit of what we were talking about with land use, and that, if the Farm Bureau, can continue to advocate, and your partners, continue to support, there, once we can get the conversation going and continuing, there is a potential to find a win-win solution. These larger regional projects, perhaps, or some, modification once an unintended consequence is identified. But we have to keep the conversation going.
I think, too, it's such a leadership opportunity, and that's my big fear around these regional projects, is that we will not be able to fill that leadership vacuum, because someone's going to have to, or a group of people are going to have to step up and be courageous and bold in bringing forward these big concepts. I mean, these are infrastructure level projects. And so we're looking for those leaders, who has a vision that can really take it over the finish line. I would love to be involved in that, but there has to be some sort of pathway or mechanism.
Right.
I'm in a position to be a really good cheerleader and someone who can kind of clear some of the pebbles out of the way or get groups together. But we're looking for people who have ideas for regional projects that are skilled in bringing those things forward. So,
and it's not something that anyone is going to tackle alone.
Right. You can't do it alone.
There's got to be leadership from the regulatory world, from the business world, from the various municipalities, from the farmers, from even landowners who aren't farmers, right? To get something like this done.
Absolutely.
So, well, thank you, Maureen. This has been a fantastic conversation. It will not be our last. I do, before we wrap up though, I do have one question for you, and that is, what are we not talking about that we need to be talking about?
I think one thing that kind of keeps me up at night is around the broader economic challenges, and how do we create a system that supports farmers in getting through this tough time? So how do we build like a real resiliency instead of thinking, like you said, on the short term, but saying, okay, these are ideally temporary situations that will resolve in 10, 20 years. I'm thinking things like lemon prices that have completely devastated.
Which we didn't even get a chance to talk about.
The lemon industry. How do we create systems that don't drain the really, really innovative thinkers that already exist in our system, the people who have all the knowledge, the multi-generational farmers, how do we keep them interested in ag and keep ag going in a time where the value is not reflecting the real value? The profits are not reflecting the value of agriculture.
Right.
They are not able to get the return on the potential. We have untapped potential. How do we get over the hump to when we're able to really execute on the amazing assets we have here in Ventura County?
Well, and maybe our next conversation can talk a little bit about, how many things are farmers providing that they're not being compensated for.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
The ecological
ecosystem services.
Exactly. Flood control, fire, breaks and fire risk reduction, not just the lemon, or the avocado.
Right.
And so, all right. So it's a commitment. You're coming back. We're going to
Yeah.
explore that.
Well, thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to be part of Ag on the Edge, and I learned so much from you, and I'm so honored to be a part of this great work you're doing.
Well, 100% likewise. I enjoy working with you, and I think, together we're making some change.
Yeah.
So great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us for another episode of Ag on the Edge. Be sure to like, subscribe, and give us a 5-star review, and we'll see you with the next episode.